party down, location mysterious. Wanna rock this con like my man James Tiberius. Jesse and Marina, they're mad clever like the Negus. Gonna guide you through the scenes, beam from London to Las Vegas. Where to go, how to dress, when to sleep, who to see. Celebs not to miss, Sardis Wong and SMG. Star Trek into awesome, build some memories at last. Set the proper course, the Shore Leave Podcast. Boom.
Welcome to the 62nd episode of Shore Leave, your Star Trek Convention Community Podcast. I am Marina Kravchuk, one of your co-hosts, and with me, as always, is the amazing, the funnest Jesse Okendo. How are you, Jesse?
Hey, I am great. The funnest. Wow, I've never had that introduction before. Thank you. No, I'm excited to, so Marina, we've been a little lax in our episodes, but we've actually done our third one in a row, like relatively right behind each other. So I'm pretty excited that we're getting our groove on. It might have taken a while.
We're trying.
So everybody listening, so we can put it in context, we are, Marina and I were talking earlier in day 50 and 51 of our self-isolation and quarantine. So we're a little crazy and a little nuts, but we're still happy to talk Trek and talk about what's going on. And with that, let me just get into the topic. So this week, we don't have a lot of conventions going on unless you're at home and you've done HoloCon or some form of virtual convention going. And I think in a couple of years when we come back and listen to this, we'll be like, we did what? But because, I've just never done a con online before, but this year I'm learning. So we're going to talk through that. We're going to talk about our fandom. We're going to talk about how we're dealing with everything that's going on. Joining us today to talk through this are the co-hosts of Subspace Transmissions, another Star Trek podcast, Cam Smith and Tyler Orton. And I will throw it over to Tyler. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your podcast, and then you can give it to Cam if he wants to say anything.
Yeah, well, Jesse and Marina, thank you so much for having us on the show. It's an absolute pleasure, and I am on starting week 7 of my own quarantine, and it's been an interesting experience, especially when you think about what Star Trek fandom is at the moment. I've definitely been, I guess Star Trek Picard was winding up its season 1 run, and so there's a lot of engagement with that just as the pandemic began to intensify. And I've been catching some Star Trek episodes a lot. Cam and I, we have to do our research every week for our own podcast, and I think it's kind of maybe highlighted the optimism of Star Trek that maybe we all like to think about this given time. But maybe just a little background on myself, and I can throw it over to Cam as well. But Cam and I, we got started on a podcast about 5 or 6 years ago. We kind of bounce around, I would say, more irreverent topics, like best musical moments or the biggest WTF moments in Star Trek, that sort of stuff. So we have a lot of fun with the series. I got into Star Trek when I was quite young. I was about, I think, 7 or 8. It was around season 5, season 6 of TNG. And I even went so far as to have my own Star Trek Voyager website, my own fan page that I did episode reviews and provided my own fan fiction. And I fell in and out of Star Trek over the years. But I think after Cam and I really started doing the podcast, I got into the conventions as well. That's where I met Jesse and Marina. And it's just been kind of a fun experience. What about you, Cam? Tell us a little bit about how you got into Star Trek. I think it's a little bit later in life for you, too.
My journey towards Star Trek is so weird and off and on, false starts and whatever, shattered promises. For me, I remember when I was young, I was probably like 8 years old. I was at my great aunt's house, and a commercial came on for advertising the syndicated rerun of the episode Arena. And I saw the Gorn, and I was like in love because I was a big Star Wars guy. I loved Bosk, the bounty hunter, and this looked very similar. So I ended up watching Arena as a kid, 8 years old, and being bored out of my mind. And I was like, I'm out. A few years go by. I have a bunch of friends who are a little older than me, but they're all really into Next Generation and the original series movies. And so I watched Wrath of Khan, really enjoy it. And then they're like, hey, you should check out the other movies. And I watched, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And, enjoyed all of them except for Star Trek 5, really. And then I was like, okay. And they're like, okay, you got to check out Next Generation. And I watched maybe 12, 15 episodes. And I was like, I'm out. this isn't working for me. And then it was 2009. And at this point, I've circulated throughout Star Wars fandom over the years, and I was big into Marvel, the world of Marvel Comics fandom for a long time, heavy metal culture as well. But the Chris Pine movie was coming out, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to watch the original series. And I went back and watched the remastered version on DVD of season 1, and I fell in love with it. And then I went through seasons 1 through 3, and then I was like, oh my God, I absolutely love this show. I met Tyler at journalism school. He said, you should watch DS9. I jumped on DS9, and then it just kind of rolled from there. Next thing I know, I'm going to Star Trek conventions. I'm having the time of my life. I've watched every episode of Star Trek to date. And it just took a long time to get there, but boy, once it started rolling downhill, it really rolled.
So I got a question.
Were you just trying to quote Faith of the Heart, Cam?
Of course. Well, we have been talking a lot about Enterprise lately on the podcast. So
yeah,
very fitting.
maybe we'll plug our own podcast, but recently we did a show all about how we're urging people to give Enterprise another chance, just in case you may have checked out of the series. I think the show is one that really deserves a second look from both my perspectives as well as Cam's.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it amazing how the fandom literally just, you must have seen that meme. It's been going around the internet for several years. That little circular thing. New series comes out, everybody hates it, everybody talks about it, and then series goes off the air, everybody misses it, and it wasn't this wonderful, give it a chance, and then it basically the cycle starts again.
Yeah, it's never gone wrong, really. Like, it's never been a case of years later people being like, you know what? That was terrible. They always come around.
So Tyler, I got a question for you. So whenever I hear you say about your Voyager webpage, it just makes me smile because I don't think I've ever met anyone that had a fan page. But was it like GeoCities and Microsoft Front Page? How did you?
It was at Angel Fire.
Angel Fire webpage. Yeah.
I must have come across it at some point.
I think it was called Star Trek Voyager LCARS, LCARS being the computer interface that they use in the 24th century. And so I created all these kind of libraries that people could go to for reviews, and I think like character bios that I wrote up. It was a lot of fun. It was very time consuming, but I clearly had a passion for Voyager. But I think after a while, my attention was drawn more and more into Deep Space Nine, and I think by the time halfway through season 6 of Voyager, I stopped updating the webpage. But it was going for a good 3.5 years, I think.
I just find that fascinating. I don't know. I every time I think I'm a really good fan, like someone outdoes me. Like having your own webpage is kind of awesome, to be quite honest.
I'm sure it's on Internet Archive somewhere.
Yeah, it's gotta be. As a matter of fact, the moment you said Star Trek Voyager LCARS, I am like 99% positive they actually had the link saved, and I used to visit that page. So
wow.
Thank you very much for some. I'm sure that I enjoyed it a lot. I cannot remember, but I'm sure I did. But
I hope you were enjoying the opinions of a 12, 13-year-old at a time. How knowledgeable.
Let's see. When I was mostly into that sort of thing, and I'll get to my bit in a bit. I was around 17, 18, so I'm sure it was fine. No, but Jesse, something that you said, and I have to bring this up. I have to quote Heather Barker, our mutual friend, and she said, recently she had a very wonderful tweet. It's like, fandom is not a competition. You do you. So, somebody else did something else. It doesn't make them a better fan than you. So, you're awesome.
No, I do, and I tell you, if it wasn't for the diversity in my Star Trek friends, I wouldn't get as much out of it as I would. It's boring when it's just people who think the way you do. So I appreciate that.
Oh, but Jesse, Cam just sent me a text message, and he's insisting that I am a better fan than you are. So I just wanted to.
He can say that because I might not see him this year in Vegas, and he'll think I'll forget. Right. But I will never forget. Hey, so before we move on, I do want to kind of. Just a little announcement from Marina and I. We've adopted a third person on our podcast, and that's Cam Smith. Cam, we want to thank you. Yeah. Welcome aboard.
I had no idea.
No, guys, for those listening, if you've heard the podcast get better week after week, it's because I no longer edit them. Cam has been helping us out with that in the background, and Marina and I were talking. We're like, we need to give him credit where credit's due. So you will see him updated on the webpage, and he'll be our third person that makes this thing go. But we wanted to kind of put you on the spot, Cam, just to tell you thank you and let you know that it's much appreciated.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, I guess that explains why the quality of my podcast has gone downhill. Because it's been split.
I'm just putting up raw files now where we're wandering off to go to the bathroom halfway through.
No, but seriously, Cam, really, thank you very much, because we've never sounded better with your help. So, a huge shout out.
That's awesome. No, thank you very much. And I have plenty of practice from God knows how many episodes of Subspace Transmissions. So yeah, I think I can finally put these skills to use.
Yeah, and I just listened to, I think, one of the last Armageddon podcasts. Some reason it just started playing in my car, and I'm like, why am I listening to this?
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks for the plug. Armageddon, for those that don't know, is my other podcast. I do an Arnold Schwarzenegger film discussion show. So not Star Trek related, but
no, it's real fun. It's real fun. So do we want to go on? I guess you guys you gave us a little background on how you got into your fandom. Marina,
yeah, Jesse, I'll go last.
Okay, you'll go last. Okay. Well, I'm a relatively new fan, so I guess an out of the closet fan. I've always loved Star Trek. And I've always loved sci-fi, but I was never one of these that stayed up for the midnight showing or anything like that. It was just if it came on TV, it came on TV. And I had a kind of a milestone birthday about 6 years ago, and I said, well, I've got to do something. And so I heard about this thing in Vegas called Star Trek convention or something, where people dress up. And I've heard about it, but I was never one of those people. I didn't even know what Comic-Con was back then. But I bought myself my ticket, and I got myself to Las Vegas, and that's where it all just came together. And where honestly, that was my 40th birthday. That whole time I didn't know that there was this whole thing where people like the show and try to live by its by what it teaches and actually got something from it. And then people kind of forming relationships around their mutual respect and love for the show. It was just fantastic. And then I just went a little crazy. So I think that year I bought like a board fridge, and all the stuff started coming into my house, all these Star Trek posters. And my mom, who I was living with, all I remember when I started doing this stuff, she says, I know her. And she was talking about Nichelle Nichols, because, Mom, I guess, grew up, knowing about Nicole Nichols and everything. And so it was great. It was like one of the few ways that I remember connecting with my mom that we never had before, because we had that mutual respect. And, since then, Voyager is my favorite series. Voyager came around a time where I needed to know that family was more than just what you're born into, and I kind of made my own family. And then now with my Star Trek friends and family and people I see, that's kind of my fandom has turned less of what's on TV and more of who can I enjoy it with. So that is me in a nutshell. So Marina, I'll give it to you.
Well, my trip to Star Trek fandom is, I suppose it's not a particularly unusual one, but in my case, I can actually pinpoint almost exactly when I became a fan. It was sometime in the fall of '98. My family only arrived to the United States in 1998. So watching television was actually very helpful. I did speak English at the time. It was just a little bit more academic, and I actually had a very British sounding accent at the time, as a matter of fact. And we didn't know anyone. We didn't have anyone in the country. So this whole thing was, everything is strange and remote, and eventually the culture shock did hit, because whatever we knew about the United States, and by we, I mean both my parents and my sister and myself, was very much, whatever you see on television or in the movies. So once, real life kind of hits you in the face, things become very, very real, very fast. So I did find, track very fast. And I was lucky because at that time, so as I said, this is the fall of '98, Voyager was still on the air. and Deep Space Nine was still on the air, and they were doing almost constant reruns of the original series and the Next Generation. Next Generation movies were still coming out. As a matter of fact, one came out, I believe, in the winter of same year. So it was like being hit from all sides of like nonstop Trek, and that for a while it was like great. My brain is occupied. It certainly sparked the imagination like nothing else. Eventually, I mean, again, this is the time when the social media, the first sprinklings became. I was never part of anything that was on the old boards, because for me, internet was, it's a mystery shrouded in in the unknown. But social media appeared. I skipped in MySpace, but I was part of, like the original version of Facebook, the intercollegiate one. And little by little, Trek suddenly became connecting me to other people, friends and everything. And it became sort of like a way of like, oh, great, I'm learning, finding out about all these things, and I can meet people and talk to people. So it became part of this whole thing, like, okay, I'm making this country my home now. And it took about 10 years between like sort of becoming a fan and actually going to convention, because for a long time I was a very armchair fan. I had enough, my time was very much occupied by my studies. I mean, my major wasn't exactly an easy one. And then I found a job straight out of college. So any kind of like travel or anything extraneous that I can actually spend my, actual finally earning an income. So I just didn't have time. So 2009 was my very first convention. And from then on, like literally, and I'm trying to snap my finger right into my microphone, literally everything just exploded. I mean, between Vegas and pretty much every other convention I attend to right now, I'd say 95% of the people that I'm friends with on Facebook are the ones that we have connection through Trek somehow. Either we met, in New York, or we met in Denver, or we met in Vegas, or we met someplace else, or it's just a constant online marinating of ideas and communications and all that other stuff. So, and here we are. Here I am.
Yeah, well, I ended up inheriting my ticket from Cam's old roommates. But Cam, how did you and former roommate Tommy Ball get to go into the Star Trek conventions?
So what happened was, it's 2010. So obviously, the JJ movie has come out, the first one. I've barreled through the original series, and they announced a Star Trek convention in Vancouver. It was on 2 days. It was a creation, and it was a Saturday, Sunday. I was only available the Saturday because the Sunday I was flying out to go to Las Vegas on vacation, unrelated to Star Trek. But I went the Saturday with my friend Tommy, and it was mostly kind of mid-tier or lower-tier DS9 guest stars that day. Like Vaughn Armstrong was there. Max Grodenchek was there. Those are the two I really remember. But we had a really fun time, and we just had a great time talking to people who are in costume, and there was not many. I mean, it was in Vancouver, pretty small ballroom. I think there was probably, I don't know, maybe 20 people in costume, but we ended up doing photos with all of them. We had a really good time. So the next year rolls around, it comes back. I do both days that year, and it was Nichelle Nichols and Walter Koenig, George Takei headlining that one. And then we find out there's a Vegas one that's like infinitely bigger. I think someone may have even mentioned it at that second Vancouver one. And so my friend Tommy and I kind of look it up, and it's like, wow, this is a lot more expensive, but it looks really, really fun. So we ended up going, and we ended up making a bunch of friends, signed up the next year. And then the year after that, Tommy dropped out, and that's when Tyler came in, and that's in 2014. And Tyler, you've been coming ever since, right?
Yeah, and that was actually the same year that Jesse started going, because I met him his first year too. So yeah, we've been hanging out ever since then. But Marina, I'm curious, what popped out to you? Do you have memories of the first convention that you went to like a decade plus ago?
Yeah, very much so. So it was 2009, and it was called Northeast Star Trek Convention. It was in Parsippany, which is literally 10 minutes away from where I am still living right now. And so it was the New Jersey Star Trek convention that Creation used to run. It just, I think at the time, because it was still in Parsippany, they had a different name for it before it changed to something else once they moved to Cherry Hill for some time. And that was actually, I came across a flyer in a bookstore that advertised the convention. I don't know, somebody was distributing them, somebody just accidentally dropped one, but I caught my eye, and it was they had, I don't know, maybe about 16, 18 guests, no more than that. Like as far as I remember, I can probably remember all the names if I think hard enough. But it was headlined by Kate Mulgrew and Leonard Nimoy. And at that point, it was sort of like, the light bulb went off because, as I mentioned, I was an armchair fan. I was reading magazines. I was consuming fan fiction in very unhealthy amounts.
You're going to amazing web pages as well.
Yes. Oh, that's very true. And it was like, well, why don't I go to convention? Why am I not going to conventions? I mean, that's a whole additional aspect of this entire tragdom. And so I went, and I only did 2 days. It was a 3-day convention. And at the end of it, I mean, I walked out with like stars in my eyes. I was like, so when is the next one? How do I do this? Because I was, at the time, I had no idea how to even go to convention. So I bought the admission ticket, and then I was just literally walking around watching what other people were doing. People going to, I don't know, somebody bought an action figure for autographing. Oh, okay. So I got one, and then I did the same thing. And then I kind of picked up by, what you do at conventions by watching people, because as I mentioned, I literally knew nobody at the time, especially people who were also, into track the same way I was. And it was wonderful. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Kate. So that was like, everything else was just, additional stuff. I really wanted to meet her, but I spent the time literally going to as many panels that I could and trying to basically, chat to people while standing in lines, figuring out stuff on my own. Now that I've done all of this, I'm actually advising people, how to do this. At the time, again, my monkey see, monkey do. Basically, that was my MO. And it was magnificent. It was wonderful. Doing the photo ops were nerve-wracking. I remember that was probably the number one thing. I mean, meeting Leonard Nimoy was unreal. It's like, it did not even feel like, okay, it's Leonard Nimoy. Everything in capital letters. I walked out and like, did I actually just meet him? Was that like a real thing? And well, as far as Kate, actually, people laugh when I tell them that I was so excited. I actually do not remember meeting her. All I have is the photo and the ticket in my little frame at home, because I walked in, we shook hands, and that's it. My brain just fried. So
I'm so bummed though. Like, I missed Nimoy just by that one day, because that first con I ever went to, that was 2 days.
Oh.
The second day, it was going to be Bill Shatner and Nimoy together on stage. That's the one I couldn't go to.
Oh,
That was that one day.
I am so sorry to hear that, because
I know. Kills me.
He was special. I saw him at his second to last in-person appearance. So that was in August of 2011 in Vegas, and then his last one was the following month in Chicago, and then of course we know that he's done Skype appearances, which kind of ties into this whole thing of a massive virtual track community existence that we all have one way or another.
Yeah, Star Trek come to life is what it is right now.
But I am sorry to hear that, because he was an incredible person.
Yeah, like some of the stars were gone before I even started going, so I can't feel too bad about missing, say, DeForest Kelly. But that Nimoy one, I was just so close. Yeah. That's what kills me.
That's actually I've had the honor and the pleasure of pretty much meeting. Well, let's not talk about Picard, because it literally just started, and only a few of the new additions to the Pantheon only just started attending conventions when everything happened. But counting out of the 6 other live action, I've met everyone except for 3 if we're talking about main characters. Unfortunately, DeForest Kelly, he literally passed away the following year when my family just arrived. So at that point, the whole concept of like, you can actually go to this place, pay, whatever. At the time, it was much cheaper than right now. So I don't know, $20, $30 for admission ticket, and actually go and shake hands with an actual Hollywood actor. For me, that was inconceivable. So I literally missed out on that. And when James Doohan passed away, he was basically, I was still an armchair fan. Mm-hmm. So 2005, I was not yet going to conventions. So I literally missed out, and I could have been doing that. Every time I look back, I'm like, what was I thinking?
But you guys, I'm like, at least you had to like step up to Vegas or something. I had no idea what a convention was. And back then I was shy. I know it's hard to believe now, but like I was not a risk taker. And I just like, I don't know, that 40 turned and I'm like, I'm going to do this. And I had never been to Vegas. I had never been in a casino. I had never drank outside of just like beers at the house. So I just went crazy. I don't know what happened, but I got to Vegas and I was just shocked. Like, and I'd walk around and I'd go, what are these people doing? And I mean, I was scared to death. And I did want to do a photo. Nicole Nichols and Kate Mulgrew were the two that I wanted to do that year. And Nicole was the first picture. And I will tell you guys that I don't know how that woman didn't get me like thrown in jail or something, because so I'm dressed up and it's my turn. You know how they rush you in, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so excited it's you. Can I hug you? And she's like, no.
I tried that on Shatner.
Yeah, so she said no. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. Then I'm almost in tears because she said no. She's like, but you can stand really close, she said. And if you look at the picture, it's literally all you see is my smile, because my eyes are like in the back of my head. It's just they were closed so tight from smiling so hard, and it was just like it's like I can't even tell you the feeling I got when I got to do that picture with her, because I had shared moments with her and my mom, because I've seen her my whole life growing up. And Nicole Nichols was someone that I knew about, not connected to Star Trek basically, but just because of what she represented when I was growing up, and what I had learned from my mom, and the whole NASA thing. And so I was just like I'm just amazed that I can meet someone. I'm a little cooler now, but if I still see an actress or an actor that really, like, I get a little tongue-tied and I don't do the right things, but it's a little crazy. But
it's the same way that I see you respond to Cam whenever you see him in Las Vegas.
What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, doesn't it, Cam?
I also refuse hugs.
But it's amazing how it changes if you kind of stick to it to get, I don't know, what's the word? It depends on how far you're plugged into this whole experience. Because obviously, far from every fan has an opportunity to go to a convention, and especially to go again and again and again, even though once you try it, it becomes almost an addiction. And
it used to be so much more doable though for fans when they had all the little local cons that ran more regularly.
It's you know what, I noticed that it kind of changed along with the rest of pop culture. Star Trek, you can't argue. Star Trek has become very much mainstream. It's part of this whole entity, and now especially with like something like Marvel Universe and DC Comics and everything being these huge powerhouses. Big things are the word on the street. If you look at all the conventions, everything just exploded in a period of about approximately 15 years. New York Comic Con in 2005, I think, was somewhere in the 35,000 people range. And they reached 180,000 in 2016. So there you go. It literally just took them 11 years. So everything is big, and it seems to be that pretty much all the franchises that have some sort of entity present on the convention circuit became kind of like not preoccupied, but it kind of became a deliberate direction into growing the bigger premier events. And that's why we're seeing, Destination appear, and that's what we're seeing STLV becoming bigger. I mean, to my knowledge, STLV occupies the entire suite of convention facilities that Rio has to offer at the moment. So
I would assume that doing the larger conventions, just the margins are going to be less thin versus all of those make or break sort of smaller conventions for a lot of the organizers.
Yeah, and so now what? We're mid-April. We're so many days into a self-quarantine, and I know I'm seeing conventions either cancel or reschedule. So how are you guys dealing with? And Marina, let me ask you first, because no one goes to conventions like you do. So
it's been a process, because obviously, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, where when things just literally started to unravel, especially in March, and everything that was planned in March got pretty much slammed immediately. Ace Comic Con got canceled. A couple of my local conventions here in New Jersey got first postponed, and now actually the postponed dates are no longer valid either. They just had to come out and say, I'm sorry, we're very sorry, we have to either move it all the way to the end of the year or just cancel altogether and see you next year, whenever. So it's been a process of sort of slow acceptance, because let's face it, I mean, it's a situation that's no joke. Large concentrations of people, especially once you get into the category of Comic Cons, it's terrifying what can happen. So obviously, things are not going to be happening. So yeah, slowly but surely, I had a brand new convention lined up in middle of June this year, which would be a brand new experience for me. There's it's called Celebrity Fan Fest in San Antonio, Texas. And literally they just announced cancellation about middle of the week last week. So sad truth, but that's the case. So unfortunately, you kind of have to roll with it. Now, as we know, that there are summer conventions. That's middle of the season. That's when we have the most of it. San Diego has canceled as of this recording. A couple of other conventions, and I suspect that pretty much everything all the way into whenever. I mean, whatever is happening in the summer is either getting moved or canceled. There's just no way around it. It's a sad truth, but unfortunately, you have to accept it.
Yeah, I resigned myself fairly quickly to the idea that we're not going to be getting conventions for this foreseeable future. I think we don't want to so much stoke unbalanced or unsubstantiated, speculation about what might be going on with STLV, but it looks quite impractical that an event of that magnitude could happen in a safe way, considering everything that we know, everything we're observing that's going on in the world right now.
And it's true of every convention, regardless of size. I mean, even the smaller ones, even if it's like 1,000-person event, all of them are going to be in the same situation. So at this point, it's just a matter of, what is called force majeure clauses of the contracts getting triggered by the unfortunate circumstances, and then just hoping that whatever the convention host can offer, whether it's refunds or postponement with moving the tickets to whenever, just hoping for the best, basically. I'm just extra bummed, I have to admit, because, like Jesse, Voyager is my favorite series, along with The Next Generation, but Voyager is my jam. And this year, with the 25th anniversary, I had an entire year of celebrating lined up, starting with the cruise back in March and then ending with DST in November. And right now, well, at least we have the cruise memories, right, Jesse?
Yeah. I know for me, like, this is my first full year in Atlanta. So I was looking forward to Treklanta, which is the local Star Trek convention sponsored by the Starfleet International group here. So that was the first thing that got not even postponed. It just got canceled because I just couldn't do it. And then Calgary Fan Expo, which I visited a friend in Calgary for that got postponed. But I think postponed just means they're not doing it they're not doing it this year, but they'll do it next year. And little by little, everything that I was going to go to, whether it's a day long or week long, it's just closing up now. As of this recording, we haven't had anything official from Creation about Vegas, but I know that the rumors have already started percolating in Atlanta for Dragon Con, which is in September, and the conversations about are we actually going to have a Dragon Con have already started to come around, because it's 8 city blocks, and that's a lot of people breathing on each other.
and it's multiple hotels, and it's quite an endeavor. I mean, one of these days I will make it out to Dragon Con, because I've heard so much about it. So we'll see.
Yeah, but like for me, I'm not. I love doing a podcast. Don't get me wrong, but like, I am not a video person. Like, I hate to video chat. Anyone knows me knows I don't do that very well. I don't mind a phone because I'm old school. Don't like the video chat, but a lot of stuff that's going right now, it's the Zoom era, if you will, right? So, so everything is Zoom, and everybody's on their little computers with their funny backgrounds, and I'm like, oh God, I don't want to see this. So like, I'd much rather Facebook Live where no one can see me like yawning or not, but I'm gonna have to get over it, because I really do think that that is how we're going to get together. Yeah. And I know Cam and Tyler and I have missed it the past 2 weeks, but our Vegas group has been getting together on the weekends through a Zoom meeting. And I don't know, we played some games, and I lose at everything, especially if Tyler's there. So, it's just not good for me. But
all props to Cam, because Cam's been really good the last few weeks, getting some fun games, whether it's not just trivia contests, but things like do your best
We had
justification
debates.
for why Jennifer Sisko is the greatest character from Deep Space Nine, like those kinds of things.
Yeah, some
Yeah,
of
it
those
was
things
like-
have been painful.
we did a night where we did dumb debates on Star Trek. So it was like arguments, organized debates over, for example, which was the best Kirk hairdo, and things like that. We also did one I called Camograms, where we rearranged, I rearranged the letters of Star Trek characters' names, or also the actors' names, and you had to figure out what it was. Also movies.
That's fun.
So there were some good ones,
Yeah.
I don't know, Marina, here's one for you. Which Enterprise actor his name rearranges into Medication King?
Oh my god. Yeah, I would have to literally. I would need to take a piece of paper and figure this out.
The answer.
Please don't put me on the spot. Yes, please.
I'll give you. The answer is Dominic Keating.
Oh, well, good to know.
There you have it.
That's a great one. That's
My
a great.
work is
No,
done.
but isn't it amazing though that we already have how many years of social media and everything with Star Trek fandom most certainly booming online, and now we have this support that we can kind of continue on with it and actually invent further avenues of communicating with other fans, even though we're all sitting in our bedrooms and kitchens and living rooms. And folks online must have noticed, there's now this whole thing with Netflix parties when everybody gets on through whatever that extension plugin, especially on Chrome, I think it's through Chrome, and everybody can have a party together. Or a lot of, the New York meetup group does, I think they use Facebook Live actually for that, but they've been movie parties through that. And then of course
Jonathan Frakes just announced
Yeah.
this week as we record on April 27th that he will be doing like a live commentary for Star Trek
you
First
literally
Contact. And
took the words right out of my mouth.
Yep.
That because
Yeah,
it's,
so-
I think it's sponsored by IGN. And then I know Paramount was actually doing an online viewing of Wrath of Khan, and of course what Jesse mentioned in the beginning, we now have this the first appearances of virtual conventions with virtual experiences with HoloCon happened. There is something that's coming up. Well, actually, I think the first one already happened. They're doing it on 2 dates. Something called In-House Con.
Yeah. That's the
Guests
other
and
one.
yeah. And
Yeah.
that one actually had real guests. I mean, since we're talking about Star Trek specifically, HoloCon, I believe, had Chase Masterson and Nicole DeBoer. And then In-House is going to have like 4 or 5 cast members from Discovery as guests, and it's different ones. It's basically your Q&A, and then In-House I think is even going further with, if you'd like, you can have an online ticket purchased and have like a personal chat like within a small group with whichever cast member. So it's quite amazing.
They're also doing a lot. They're doing, because I caught it this weekend. I don't know if it was HoloCon or the in-house one, but they had like an hour or so where somebody was doing prosthesis, an hour or so where someone was talking cosplay. Yeah. I mean, it's the stuff you see, maybe not at a creation convention, but definitely that you would see at a fan run convention, but just over a Zoom call, which amazes me because the talent that you have to have, not only to be able to share that, but the courage to get on there, not knowing how many people are like staring at you, at least in the auditorium, you can see.
I was going to actually point that out. It's basically, it's this natural sort of progression. I mean, we have a whole lot of Facebook groups, if we're speaking about Facebook specifically, with everything you can think of, cosplay and ship models, any kind of aspect of Star Trek that people may want to kind of concentrate on. There's probably a Facebook group about it. And this one is sort of like, okay, this is several steps further when it's public and it's this, communal experience of, you guys into cosplay, take pictures, let's have an online costume contest, basically. Quite fascinating. Yeah. Just to add on some things that, those folks who are, this is not specifically Trek, but it may be interesting to those who just generally like the variety of genres normally present at Comic-Cons. Conventions like Wizard World, GalaxyCon, they've actually been posting Q&As, live Q&As over Facebook Live. So it's this sort of fun stuff where you can at least, get a feeling, at least get some entertainment without going to a convention. Obviously, it's not the same.
Well, I'm curious. How do you guys feel about that as an experience in substitute for the in-person stuff, which we understand that they're not really comparable, but for me, the thing that I dig most is going and meeting people and interacting with them in person versus just watching the panels, although there's always great panels there. But I wonder how you guys feel about this virtual stuff.
That is actually where I do think that it pales in comparison for the actual experience of a convention, and not so much even the actual meeting of a person meeting the celebrity, but convention brings with it so much more. And that's primarily actual, hanging out with other fans. Let's sit down at the bar, let's go out, in the restaurant, have a dinner together and talk track, hang out in the bar. I mean, look at SCLV. Every evening is just filled with get-togethers and the little groups and getting together, watching something or talking about track and doing whatever. And that's obviously right now is limited quite literally what Jesse brought up, having Zoom conversations with each other.
Yeah, it's not the same.
It's not the same.
Like,
I'm glad that we have it, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm glad it's incredible. Can you imagine 20 years ago if this happened?
We'd be on our party lines.
But it would be nowhere near to this amazing. It's still an amazing opportunity that we get to connect to each other online.
Yeah, like for me, I love what I love about the conventions is what Tyler said is like the relationships and the camaraderie. So I do miss that, but I still can get a little bit of it because, like even this conversation, I mean, we don't talk every day, but I can sit down and call any of you guys and just have a conversation. If I felt like I needed to talk track for some reason at 2:00 in the morning, I would probably call someone. Maybe, I don't know, but I'll tell you,
don't call me at 2:00 in the morning.
But there is a danger. So let me just, because Jesse's always got a story. So like when these online things all started, when we shelter in place and whatnot. Well, I have, I've always had Zoom and I've always had like a WebEx because of where I work, and so like. But you have to learn to switch the accounts around. So like I'm having a Zoom meeting with a new client that I have at work, and I was on my regular Zoom account that I was using to like do this stuff online, and the picture was me in that Rios pimp costume. The background was a spaceship, and so I get on this call with these people from work, and they're like, "What is that?"
Jesse, compared to what I've seen online popping up with somebody, I'm sorry, without basically butt naked walking into somebody else's Zoom business meeting.
Oh my God!
Somebody seeing your wonderful pink pimp suit is really not that bad.
I mean,
I've warned Cam that he needs to put clothes on.
During the quarantine, pants are optional.
Well, yes, but I'm just happy that the people I was on the phone with, they're like, "What is that?" And I'm like, I'm sorry, that's my personal account.
It's Jesse's secret life.
And hey, it broke the ice. I didn't have to do any icebreakers at meetings. So, but that's the kind of stuff though that I do like about like a Zoom is, you still have that connection a little bit, but you do miss, like what I miss is the people watching, to be quite honest, and all the costumes and stuff and all the accents and all the interactions. That's what I get out of a convention experience for me. So I am missing it, and it hurts.
Speaking of accents though, Marina, can you briefly do your British accent that you were using when you first moved to the US?
You know what? It's practically gone. I'm trying to think if there's anything.
That's a bummer.
No, seriously, and I can tell you, it took roughly, I'm gonna say about 2.5, 3 years when I realized, things are definitely, I can actually hear myself talking differently. And then once my first job, I had to do quite a lot of phone calling for, I work in construction industry. So at the time I had to call vendors to ask for quotes for various things. And I called up and there was a large company somewhere in Texas, I believe. And I said, hello, my name's Marina, calling from this and that company from New York City, and we do this and that. And the first thing the person said, she's like, "Oh, I can hear that." And I'm like, "Really? you can actually make out, well, first of all, I was kind of happy that she was responding to the fact that it was New York accent rather than, Russian one. And even though, what, majority of people actually cannot tell that Russian is my native language. So they can just tell that I have an accent. I mean, I know I have an accent. But in this case, there was I just said, I'm calling from New York City. And she's like, yeah, I can hear that. So you know what? I need to practice, Tyler. So whenever I see you next time, I'm going to try and do the British, accent specifically for you.
I appreciate that. I also did notice a few moments ago you said "what," so that's your New York accent coming out.
There are
I
some...
would say "bot." You said "bot."
There you go. You know what? That "aw" sound is something. I mean, I don't have it quite as much. There are very select words where it just comes out, like coffee, for instance. My sister, when she moved away for school, she went to medical school in Iowa. She spent in the Midwest probably, I'm going to say, about 7 to 8 months. And then she and I were talking on the phone, and I said, well, Mom has to help out. I have to make some coffee. And she's like, oh my God, you do say it that way. I'm like, what are you talking about? She says, you actually do say Kauphy. That's how you pronounce coffee. I'm like, well, there you have it.
What's the name, Marina? What's that place that the New York away team goes to? That Irish.
O'Looney's, and it's
O'Looney's, yes.
Yes, and oh my God, I miss our get-together so badly.
Well, what I remember most when you talk about accents is like that's where you become a New Yorker. if there's any place that Marina's accent changes, it's in O'Looney's. I don't know why, but like
I don't know. It must be the beer. I don't know. No, but it is one of those things that, like you said, hanging out with your fellow fans, and it's a little bit depressing when you start to think about it. So as I said, I am infinitely grateful that we do have internet, that we do have social media, because generally, middle of the day when I'm having my lunch, or end of the day when I'm catching up on all the emails and everything, the personal stuff, I find that I'm actually just as occupied, if not more, with online communication as when I was with, my regular day routine before the quarantine hit. So it's an interesting existence, but that's what we have right now.
So let's talk through, so what's next, right? So we were social distancing and volunteer quarantine. When, honestly, if you could guess, what do you think the next phase of being a fan and conventions is going to be, especially since they're so dependent on a bunch of people being together? Will we ever get back to our normal convention going? And let's start with Cam. What do you think?
I mean, for us, it's a little bit different because, you guys both live in the U.S., so I don't know how the U.S. will operate, but Tyler and I are both living in Canada, in BC, and it becomes a real question of something like STLV. When will we as international travelers even really be able or comfortable to travel to another country to visit these sorts of events, especially if we have to do 2-week quarantines when we get back? There's a lot of questions surrounding that. So it's very, very hard for us to determine when we would feel safe to even go to the convention. That's the real problem.
Yeah.
And I would have to think that live events, like large live events, are going to be the last thing in which restrictions loosen. So maybe we'll be able to go to restaurants soon. Mm-hmm. But just realistically, I think it's an all or nothing sort of deal when it comes to these conventions. And there's a lot of uncertainty right now, but I just don't know how comfortable the masses would feel going to these conventions without a vaccine or a proven treatment for COVID-19 at this point.
Yeah. Marina, what are your thoughts? Because I'm more hurt for you because I know you had this year planned out.
Oh my God, I know. I mean, just if anyone is wondering, because besides the cruise, I had 7 conventions lined up and a few more kind of just out there in the back burner. So my aim was 10 conventions for the year, and obviously this is not happening. And as I said, it was a slow process, but I've come to kind of accept that that's unfortunately the case. I'm hopeful that things will start changing, but it's unpredictable. We don't know at what point they will hit upon, as Tyler said, either a vaccine or some sort of form of treatment. Because even if tomorrow they announce, great, we got one, distribution is going to take a long time. We have a lot of people in this country, and then of course international stuff is even beyond that. I also think that it's probably going to be little by little. It's first going to be other social entities opening up, such as restaurants, bars, etc., before it moves on to larger collections of people like concerts or conventions. How it's going to go and how fast, I don't think it's possible to predict right
I
now.
can't
I'm
even
just,
I
yeah,
can't even predict like when movie theaters are going to open. So
yeah.
it's like if I can't figure out when a movie theater is going to be opening here in
And
Vancouver. I can't even imagine when a convention would be going.
yeah, and it's sort of it's kind of anxiety producing when you start to think about like how amorphous this is. Like nobody can predict it when is the deadline, when is there a light at the end of the tunnel, and you know,
Well, I
people
will
are
Well,
tell
dying.
you.
hypothetically, if they do return, do you guys think that they will look different, that they'll feel different? We might have to engage in social distancing through numbers of seats if people are willing to do that. I just wonder if there's going to be a bit of a transformation moving forward.
I think there will be, and I'm in Georgia, so like I was happy or not, we were one of the first states that started like letting the gyms open again and some restaurants and all that stuff. So and I moved from Oklahoma because that was the other state. So like double whammy for me, for everybody. But what you get, what I'm seeing here is while these places they want to open back up, they're not going to be the same, and they'll admit that, right? So like one of the restaurants that I love to go to, I will not go back until we get a little more clear, but like they're letting people come back into the restaurant for more than just pickup. But there's no waiters to take your order. You have to go, you order yourself at the bar, you get your food, and then they make you sit outside. You can't sit in the restaurant. But
I think that only applies to you, Jesse.
Thanks, Tyler. See, my ego is just built up so big when Tyler's around. But the gyms are, so like I go to a Planet Fitness. Full disclosure, I signed up to go to a Planet Fitness. I don't know how often I went, but that's where I go. And they're limiting the amount of people that can be in the gym. So normally, a big size gym, you can have like 200 people at a time in Atlanta. Now they're only allowing like a certain amount, depending on what time of day it is. And then the equipment is going through advanced cleaning, if you will, and everybody's getting a lesson and the temperatures are being checked. And so like that's the kind of stuff that makes me not concerns me, because I want everybody to be safe, but are we going to get used to that eventually? Like if I go to a convention, am I going to be ready for them to take my temperature and tell me, no, you can't go?
There are other parameters. I mean, obviously it depends on what the convention can and cannot afford, in terms of both money and the space and everything. But I was thinking, like something as enormous as New York Comic Con, obviously you would have to put some sort of limiters in terms of how many people are getting in and how they're moving around. The aisles in the vendor halls are pretty tight. Does that mean they're going to be allowing less vendors in so you can spread out and have wider avenues between, these pockets of where the vendors are set up? Panels. Does that mean you're going to actually allow fewer people getting in, and then as a consequence, does that mean that the convention is going to actually kind of back up? Whereas you can, I don't know what the daily attendance for New York Comic Con is. Does that mean they're going to drop, actually push the attendance down by 25, 30, whatever percent to make sure that have little arrows on the floor, making sure people are walking
going in the right direction.
I'm thinking about, I just went to the store, so that's what I had to go. I had to follow the arrows in order to get in and get out. But it's interesting to speculate, I suppose, but somehow naturally, I'm sure we'll figure out. I'm sure some things will change, but how and to what extent, it's anybody's guess.
I have to imagine it will change the way celebrity photo ops look. I feel like a lot of them will start to look like those ones we saw from years ago with Avril Lavigne, where there's like 6 feet away between the celebrity and the guest.
Well, I've had experience with different guests where it was kind of built in already, where it was like, okay, please, the guest requested no touching, no handshakes, not even fist bumps, and it's so it's there he or she is sitting on the chair. You go up, you stand two steps away, they take a picture, and you walk out, and you kind of respect it because the guests, and I know a lot of people have problem with that, especially if it's your first time, you kind of really want to meet the person, or if you're experienced with prior conventions where people hug and do whatever, you're kind of like, oh, it was so cold and impersonal. So probably some of that may become a bit more common as people kind of like, I'm sorry, no handshakes, let's just stand next to me, we'll take a picture and smile.
Yeah, you just think about my Nichelle story. You just go up and say, "I'm gonna hug you," and then they throw you out of it or something. But
Well, I hope it means that when I get a Jason Isaacs photo that he's in a plexiglass booth and I can call it a torture chamber.
I'm just gonna, after we finish recording here, I'm gonna go and look at my photo ops, because in 1 year I got hugged by, Jason Isaacs and Carl Urban and Nathan Fillion. So that's probably not gonna be happening anytime soon again.
I've
Yeah.
never been hugged by a single Star Trek celeb.
No,
We
neither
got-
have I.
but we did
I've had
get to
Terry
see.
Farrell lean away from me. That was
Yeah.
humiliating.
I've seen a photo. But we did. So we were on the cruise. Probably the week before the cruise ships started having problems docking. But we got in there in enough time to get the no handshake stuff, no hugs. You could fist bump or elbow bump.
Mhm.
And when we got on the ship, I know most of us, because we're used to going to these conventions where you hug everybody, we're like, oh, that's just silly, we were hugging anyway. And I think now, like, I appreciate what they try to do, but it's going to be kind of a cultural change for us, because even the people who don't like to touch or aren't big huggers, you're handshaking, you're putting hands on shoulders, there's always a connection. And so that's what I wonder, am I going to lose, because I'm selfish, am I going to lose like that human contact that I didn't have because everybody's distancing, and I don't know the answer to that, but.
Well, I also wonder if all of these new measures that might have to be put in place and the costs associated with that, if you're getting your temperature taken or there's plexiglass everywhere, does that mean the conventions are going to get more expensive, that those costs will be passed down to the convention goers? And I wonder if it becomes prohibitively expensive for many swaths of people that would otherwise go.
Yeah, well, you think about, I was in the airline industry right after 9/11, and we definitely saw the impact of 9/11 on our ticket prices, because it wasn't a small thing that you have to get all those new machines and all the additional agents and the whole new agency. I'm not saying that this is going to be that, but when you make that amount of change into something, I would bet money that we are going to see increased prices, just because it costs that much more to run something.
And also extended time. Remember, all the additional things that accumulated, we're talking about airlines over the years, with the addition of going through security and everything, now it's, allow 3 hours before you get to the airport. So, is it going to be something similar? Start lining up to get into the convention center, 3-4 hours beforehand. And I'm talking about more or less regular Comic-Con,
Yeah.
I suppose, rather than something as big as San Diego, where it's already kind of people lining up morning before.
Yeah, I think we take for granted. I do take for granted. Like when I heard about San Diego Comic-Con postponing, I didn't really think about that too much until I started thinking about Vegas, and I started thinking about the things I do, and like, it starts from like when you try to buy your ticket, right? So you're thrown into a virtual waiting room and you're waiting for your number to be called. And Marina, you when you went to New York City Comic-Con, it was almost similar, where you went to something way early just to get a seat, right?
Yeah, and because it was impossible, just based on prior experience, it's like it's always lines and it always fills up, and that's it. Once in this case, it was a hall, like a concert hall size space. Once it's filled up, that's it. There is no guarantee that places will fill up, because New York Comic-Con in particular, they don't clear the room.
I've seen that. I've seen those lines, though. I mean,
yeah,
you don't get 6 feet between each other.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and then it just feels so packed. But that's a separate location. That's Hulu Theater. That's on 34th Street. Well, not between different streets, but bottom line, it's by Penn Station rather than Javits Center. But Javits Center is insane.
Oh.
Once you're inside, it's a sea of people. Like literally visualizing that many people. That's New York Comic Con. So that sort of thing, I don't even know how the monsters are going to handle it. I wasn't surprised. I was waiting for San Diego to do something, but San Diego is literally in a class of their own, because they have a very sizable economic effect on San Diego, not only the city but also the county, I believe. So in that case, it is something that has. I mean, can you imagine San Diego happening in current circuit? It's just not. It's completely unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
I think that con would take another week to do if you did that. So, alrighty.
I do wonder though, like if you put all these extra restrictions, for example, on Las Vegas, you know, you're cutting the number of people allowed, you're throwing up plexiglass, temperature checks, you know, higher prices because of all these obviously issues. You wonder how much of the magic is just drained out of it for the consumer to be like, yeah, I want to go. There'll be some people that will always go. Some people are going to go no matter what. But you wonder about the people who are more on the fence going like, that doesn't sound that fun to me.
Yeah, but you know what? I still think that like with the opening, the cultural adjustment, the procedural adjustment is also going to be gradual. Eventually, people will get used to it, just like everybody got used to taking their shoes off in the airports.
That's true.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's going to be a slow adoption into what we're calling the new normal. So like I believe whatever the first thing is where a bunch of people go is going to be not as well attended as the next thing. You know, it's going to have to vet itself out that the precautions are actually doing something. Because what would be sad is if we did all this and then learn from it and still show up and, you know, in some sort of arena watching a sports game and all get sick because we didn't learn how to take care of ourselves. And so I'm okay as long as we learn a lesson from all this. It's just, you know, when stuff like this happens and you don't learn anything from it, that I feel like we've just lost our chance to better ourselves.
Well, Cam and I, we do live panels every year in Vegas. We go up on stage. So, Cam, at least we have an excuse if nobody attends our live panels this next time.
Well, I don't know. We had a pretty good excuse a few years ago, and they put us up against Patrick Stewart.
That was just mean. I don't know why the organizers did
that. I went to your panel, so there.
We appreciated it very much, Jesse.
Tyler, first of all, thank you for joining us, but give us your kind of what are your last thoughts? What are when someone listens to this, what do you want them to take away from this to this time of craziness that we're in?
I'll say what I appreciate though is realizing that the community that we've all cultivated for all these years, it still exists. It's still going strong. We may not be able to get to see all our dear friends in a few months like we were hoping to. I mean, it's a highlight of my year every year going to Las Vegas. But just reach out, you know, to those folks, give them a phone call or get on a Zoom live chat with them. It's so much easier to reconnect. Jesse, I know what you're saying, like the live videos, you know, they're not always fun to do, but when I'm with friends, it is like a good feeling to have. And I just hope that other people are making similar efforts and keeping that community spirit alive.
Yep. And I promise I'll be there this Saturday. Now I feel guilty. I will be there.
Well, Cam just sent me a text message. He says he's canceling it on Saturday.
You know what? I'll tell you one thing. I have threatened to go to Vancouver, and I will do it in the middle of a quarantine.
I want to be there watching you get across the border. Right
I know.
We'll stick the moose on you.
And I'll be driving on the left-hand side of the road, too.
Of course.
Right, so
For
Cam...
I may not know, I convinced Jesse that we drive on the left side of the road because it's called Vancouver, British Columbia. He believed me.
For a year.
Oh my gosh.
And that story is hilarious. So he told me this when we were in San Francisco, I think is what I remember. And then a year I'm believing this. And then I went to Calgary Fan Expo and with our friends, and you know, one of my friends who also part of the Vegas gang, and I was just talking. I'm like, it's amazing. How do you know what side to drive on? I mean, where does it tell you to get on the other side? And she just looked at me like I was an idiot. I told her what the guy said, and he's like, they are pulling your leg. That is not true. And I'm like, and I tell you what, I kept that to myself for another 3 or 4 months. We get to Vegas in our little group, and I went, I have something to talk to you guys about.
But yes. In all honesty, I had totally forgotten that I did that to you. And so when you reminded me, I burst out in laughter. Like my gut hurt. I was laughing so hard.
That is just too much.
And this is what my Star Trek family is all about. Cam, what are your final thoughts?
Well, yeah, you bring up the Star Trek family and all that, and I think that is one thing that's really kept a lot of us going, is that even though conventions are mostly off the board, it seems, for the year, we do have these families and friendship groups created by the conventions that now exist, which we would not have had if it weren't for Star Trek conventions in the first place. So, I mean, that's obviously a really awesome gift it's given to all of us. It's made all of this somewhat more bearable. I think all of us are still stressed and what have you, but it has brought some fun to it. The one thing, though, I do miss a lot, though, is whenever you go to Las Vegas, without potential restrictions and all that, when you just settle into the normal environment of STLV, there's a real, spirit of the wonder of the universe of Star Trek around you. It's kind of like when you go to Disneyland and you're just, enveloped in this world of just, fantasy that you just fall in love with. And I get the same thing when I go to Star Trek conventions. And I miss that. That is what I'll miss the most. And I can't wait to get back to it.
Yeah, and I would agree with you 100%. I know the one thing that scares me a little bit as we talk about changes in the normal is it 2, maybe 3 years ago, where we had a big issue with the weapons policy, and we hired these at Vegas. We hired additional security to do the weapons check, and the first day, the lines were just out of control, and that's just to get in. You already bought your ticket, you're just waiting to get in because there's a weapons check. And so I'm not looking forward to a lot of changes, because I feel like what it's going to do, we're going to have to learn again how to be in this whole thing. The good thing, though, is that I think we're in a community that cares. And so, while we're seeing a lot of, profit before humanity in some areas, I really think that, Marina, you had said this earlier, one of the best things about conventions is who you meet in line, right? And so I don't mind spending extra time in line because it'll be fun. I worry about people not getting the same experience I've had. I worry about people not wanting to connect because of the physical distance you might have to keep from each other. But at the end of the day, if I can be selfish, I've got a core of family that it's my go-to. And this podcast is part of it. The Vegas Brain Trust with these guys is part of it, and all that. I'm never not going to have that. It's just going to be different. Once I get used to to doing it differently, I think I'll be okay. And I'm hoping that's the same for everyone else. So, Marina, what are your thoughts?
It's both Tyler and Cam already covered that, as far as missing the community, the actual in-person community that we have when we meet up, whether it's at a convention or any of the away groups, away teams meeting up, LA, New York, wherever in the country or in the world. But I still want to stress that I am grateful for what we do have, because we do have that built online community that is sprawling, and yes, it's very intimidating and sometimes unpleasant. And we all know, the dark underbelly of social media and just fandom and everything that comes with it. But at the same time, we do have an established online Star Trek fandom. Thank goodness for that. Thank goodness that we have those connections, because, in a situation like this, having them, maintaining them does provide you with, you're not just sitting in your own little hole by yourself with nothing. So I'm grateful for that, and I do hope, is it hopelessly hoping? I don't know, but I do hope that things will get better, that there will be a light at the end of the tunnel sooner than later, and we'll see each other again.
Perfect. Well, that is you guys, it's always fun talking to all of you, so I want to thank you for that. So anything else before we close up?
Just a final roundup. Let's talk
Sure.
about the social media, as we always do. So, Tyler, where can people find you online?
Yeah, you can find me at Reporton. That's REPORTON. N as in novel coronavirus.
Oh boy.
Cam?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at CamV as in virus, novel, Smith. And of course, you can check out our podcast, Subspace Transmissions. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Again, that's Subspace Transmissions. You can also Follow us on Facebook. Just look it up, Subspace Transmissions. Again.
All right, and Jesse?
Hey, I'm at Outrageous Okendo. That's OUTRAJESOKENDO. That's on Instagram and Twitter, or look for me on Facebook and you can find me there. I'm also one of your administrators along with Marina for the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group. And I think that's it for me. I mean, I'm everywhere. Just find me.
Yeah.
And Marina, the best for last, of course.
Again, of course. And you can find me under my full name, Marina Kravchuk, I'm actually only on 3, so Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The handle is at Dracorex, DRAKKOREX. And of course, you can find Shoreleaf both on Facebook under our full, very long name, and also at Shoreleaf on Twitter. And speaking of Shoreleaf, as you know, it's part of the Triquetra Transmissions Network. And if you enjoy what we do here or any of our sister shows on Triquetra Transmissions, please consider joining our Patreon. You can go directly to patreon.com/The Triquetra Transmissions, or visit our network page, which is www.thetriquetratransmissions.com, and click on the Patreon link. Becoming a patron will get you access to unedited and early release episodes with bonus materials very often, invitation to hangouts, patrons, perhaps some surprises. And as always, we thank all our patrons and all our regular listeners for your support. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen, and keep on trekking.
Thanks.
Transfer complete.